Thanks, Rahul and your entire wonderful team, and to Sarayu Trust as well for inviting me for this rather alarming topic. I'll try not to scare you all, but the nature of the topic is as such. So if you have any questions, please, kind of note it down so that we can do this. I can answer them in the Q&A at the end. So the topic is how fourth generation warfare has already entered India and captured the minds of our youth. So that's a mouthful. So let's quickly try and break it down, what this whole fourth generation warfare means. Now, this term was derived, it's actually a concept by an former American defense guy. He also worked for the US intelligence. He says, he gives a list of 4 generations of warfare. The first 3 generations include what are known as, what we are all familiar with as traditional warfare, as in the sense of one country's or one kingdom's military engages with the military of the enemy country or the adversary country. So all 3 generations of this war, of this kind of warfare, fall under broadly a direct military engagement and not a civilian engagement. So now to understand, some of the facets of fourth generation warfare, we will kind of need to go back in history for quite a bit. But before that, you don't need to answer, just raise your hands. I will begin with just 2 questions. Question number 1, how many of you think that communism is dead? Quickly. You can, reply on chat as well. How many of you think that communism is dead? Okay, Rahul says yes. Next. Okay, Charit says it's not dead. Renuka says it's not dead. Arpita says it's dead. Next, anyone? Quickly. Okay, question number 2. How many of you have heard of the following terms in, just 10 years or 15 years ago? I'll throw some terms randomly. Body positive, fat shaming, slut shaming, LGBT, food fascism, dress fascism, what is that? Gay pride, triggering, safe spaces. These are random terms. So how many of you have heard of these terms? Even say before 10 years earlier or 15 years before? Quickly. Renuka says no, Kaushik Reddy says no, Charit says no, Arpita says some of them yes. Then who else? Himanshu, no. Come on, quickly. Quickly, come on. All right, so there's a reason I, put forth these 2 questions, because they kind of form the foundation for the rest of my talk. So the topic of today's talk, fourth generation warfare, it has invaded India and captured the minds of the Indian youth. What we today call as fourth generation warfare is nothing new. It is simply old wine in a new bottle. It is communism, pure and simple, as direct as that. It is also an armed revolution of a different kind, except that this armed revolution, this time around in its present avatar, is far more dangerous, and it is operating at unimaginable levels. There's a reason I also, mentioned these terms and asked you whether you had heard them 15 years back, is because even 15 years ago, the approach of communism, or what is known as fourth generation war today, it has ever since become multi-pronged, and its attack is relentless, and it seemingly faces almost no, cohesive, coherent opposition. And in the context, specifically in the context of India, Fourth generation warfare is a naked war against the Indian state and against the Hindu civilization specifically. But then in order to understand what is today known as fourth generation warfare, like I said, we need to go back right into its roots, uh, when, how, and where it originated, and how it has acquired such frightening power in India, simply because it has nearly a century of history. So let's quickly rewind back to this 100 years back to a century. And let's all travel back to Europe, and specifically the former USSR, or the Soviet Russia. So one of the important predictions of Marxist theory is that if a major war broke out in Europe, remember that 100 years back, almost all major powers in Europe were colonized. They owned colonies. Britain owned India, France owned, various parts of Africa and so on. So Marxist theory 100 years back predicted that if a major war broke out in all these powerful military powers in Europe, countries in Europe, the working class, that is the laborers, generally the working class, across Europe would unite into one single unit, irrespective of which country they belong to. They would unite and fight on the side of communism against their own countries. The outcome of such a fight would establish a grand European continental communist order by overthrowing capitalism. This was a prediction, but what happened in reality is something all of you are familiar with. So when the First World War actually broke out in 1914, to their horror, the communists found out that the exact opposite of what they had predicted happened. The individual workers of the Communist Party in respective European countries, could be the Labour Party of the Communist and Socialist unions in England, in France, in Germany, all these countries, they were patriots basically. So they fought as Englishmen, they fought as Frenchmen, they fought as Italians, they fought as Germans, for their country. What does that show? It shows that patriotism, the roots of patriotism, is as old as, say, human civilization. So the communist prediction had spectacularly imploded. But then if there's one thing that all of us need to understand about communism or leftism, is that they will not give up. No matter how bad the setback is, they will not give up. So typically, then once the First World War was over, they huddled together and began to figure out what had gone so horribly wrong. And of all the prominent people who kind of gathered, to do some, take some stock taking, two Marxist intellectuals or two Marxist theorists are prominent. The first one, his name is Antonio Gramsci. He hailed from Italy. And the second guy is, his name is George Lukács, and he hails from Hungary. And they came forward to investigate the causes for this failure of their prediction, of their grand prediction. And the answer they found, why communism failed so badly, their prediction so badly, the answer they found might surprise you, but it won't be surprised when you learn what we are all witnessing today. So this is the answer. Why the communists in First World War did not fight as communists but fought as patriots is because of family and traditional values such as loyalty, patriotism, nationalism, conservative sexual and ethical morals, which were very strong and which precisely prevented these people from embracing the global communist order. And so, what was the way out? How to kind of overcome this big problem? by destroying these traditional values. And so, but before you can destroy something, something as deep rooted as family values and nationalism and patriotism, you have to study it, and that's exactly what they did. So in 1923, under the inspiration of the same George Lukács, a group of German Marxists established something called the Institute for Social Research. You see how these terminologies are named, in a very generic fashion. An Institute for Social Research can mean anything. So, so this Institute for Social Research was established in 1923 in Frankfurt, and eventually this came to be known as the infamous Frankfurt School. I'm sure some of you in this group have heard this name. And prominent members of the Frankfurt School included Max Horkheimer, Theodor Adorno, Wilhelm Reich, Erich Fromm, and Herbert Marcuse. So these names will occur as I progress in my talk. So Frankfurt School made a clear departure from the traditional theory of communism defined by Karl Marx. Karl Marx had defined communism in purely economic terms, that, the struggling workers, the laborers versus the rich bourgeoisie. That's the capitalists, basically. So Frankfurt School made a clear departure from defining communism in these terms, and instead it defined it in societal and psychological terms. So I'll read out a quote. The Frankfurt School argued that culture was not just one part of what Karl Marx had defined as the society superstructure, but it was an independent and a very important variable. The Frankfurt School also said that the working class would not lead a Marxist revolution because it was becoming part of the middle class, and which would only, with good economic progress, the middle class would graduate up and move up to become the bourgeoisie. If traditional market forces, economy as we know it in the traditional fashion was allowed to operate properly in a smooth fashion, you would, in about 2 or 3 generations, a guy or a family of lower middle class would eventually graduate to the upper class. That is a bourgeoisie. So how this was the target population for the Frankfurt School to destroy. So who would do this, carry out this actual destruction? Herbert Marcuse in the 1950s came up with a brilliant answer. It was a coalition of blacks, students, feminists, and homosexuals. Does this sound familiar to all of you? So you see where the roots of today's rabid feminism, some people call them feminazis, but I mean, they're interchangeable. All these LGBT movements and other toxic, circuses that keep happening in our cities. So these are the roots, going back to about a century. But then to continue my story, after Hitler came to power, the Frankfurt School was completely banned. And, due to sheer fright, all these guys, they were all academics, Herbert Marcuse and Theodor Adorno, all these guys. They were so scared of Hitler, he would just send them to the gas chamber or something. So they quickly took the next flight to the US and migrated there. And most of them took academic positions in the Columbia University. And if there is any one institution in the last 50 or 60 years that has done total damage to the academia and the society, it is the humanities departments at universities like Columbia and Chicago University is another big culprit. And it is the same Columbia School of Journalism that has produced all your, Barkadats and Enrams and a lot of other prominent, I don't like to call them journalists, but yeah, people like them. But in any case, step by step, the Frankfurt School began to spread its tentacles in the American academia. One major step that, was responsible for its great success today is to invent something called a critical theory. Again, another very innocuous term. What is critical theory? You would, just by looking at those two words, you would think that it is something profound and academic. It is not. One definition of critical theory is as follows. It is to criticize every traditional institution, starting with the family. It is to criticize every traditional institution brutally, unremittingly, in order to bring them down. So the Frankfurt School eventually began to write a series of what is known as studies in prejudice, which basically said that anyone who believes in traditional values and traditional culture is either prejudiced, is a racist, is a sexist, and is a fascist. So today, if you see, the inventions of these different branches of these terms, most of us are familiar with racist and fascist. The word sexist was not very common in public vocabulary even 40 years back. You might be surprised to learn that. So today it has expanded basically to say sexist and homophobic and transphobic and whatever other phobia. So this was basically accomplished through inventing something called a critical theory. But it did not merely stop at that. It went one step further. It simply branded any person who dared to criticize a critical theory as mentally ill. So even if you offer with solid proof, if you offer and rebut this whole critical theory bogus, they would not argue with you. They will simply brand you as insane. How do you fight such a intellectual battle? We'll come to that in a while. So at any rate, in public discourse, this kind of argumentation proved highly effective. And long story short, the Frankfurt School was assured that it virtually met with zero opposition. So, I mean, how do you argue with a person? You can argue with a person who kind of will agree if you show proof to the logical proof to the contrary to what he's saying. But if somebody simply says that, if you disagree with me, it means that you're mad. You simply can't win this. And this was one of the great techniques by which the Frankfurt School became so pervasive and widespread. And this critical theory is also the origin of what we are all familiar with as multiculturalism, what is known as cultural Marxism, and that other dreadful word, political correctness. This is the origin of all these diseases. And along with political correctness and culture and multiculturalism, an extremely toxic ingredient was added roughly mainly in the 60s. This is the so-called sexual revolution, which happened on American university and college campuses. This is a very important point that we should keep in mind, and it will become clear as I go along. And this sexual revolution was primarily based on a very, very influential book by Herbert Marcuse. It is known as Eros and Civilization. I read through that, not fully, but substantially. It is unreadable. I mean, it is typically like, you would read some book by, say, Ram Guha or somebody. The prose is so convoluted, it is totally unreadable. And it is purposely written in that kind of language so that, when somebody kind of opposes that this book is unreadable, you can automatically put him down saying that, this guy lacks an education if he can't understand this book. So again, it comes to the same theory that, if I disagree with you, you're mad, basically. So this book, Eros and Civilization, became a kind of Bible for most American college students of that period, roughly the early 60s or mid 60s up to the early 80s. So it became a kind of Bible for them. And, just to summarize the book, Eros and Civilization advocates freeing sex from any restraints, and it says that by indulging in free sex and uninhibited sex, we will create a society with no work, but which a society where where you don't need to work for a living, but you will be guaranteed only pleasure and games and play. This was actually written in a book, in an academic book. And a lot of other so-called scholars have done thesis on the PhDs on this book. But anyway, and again, just one more question. How many of you have heard this famous slogan, "Make love and not war"? You can reply on the chat. Okay, Renuka says yes. Sarit says yes. Himanshu says yes. Anybody quickly? Okay, so this famous slogan, "Make love, not war," was adapted into a song, I think, by Bob Marley in 1970s, early 1970s. This phrase was coined by the same guy named Herbert Marcuse. He also coined another dangerous term called liberating tolerance. So what does liberating tolerance mean? I mean, it sounds so beautiful, right? All these words, it sounds so lofty, and it gives you a sense of joy and happiness. But how did it define liberating tolerance as? Here is the definition. Liberating tolerance means a tolerance for all ideas coming from the left and intolerance for any ideas coming from the right. Obviously, I'm talking about the Western left and right. So this is what liberating tolerance means. Meaning, if you tolerate all ideas coming from the left, you get liberated. But it is not enough if you tolerate leftist ideas. You must be actively intolerant towards all ideas coming from the right. How can you escape this? So, in any case, the so-called sexual revolution also set the stage for rabid feminism, which in turn led to the divorce epidemic in the US primarily, and then spread to Europe, obviously. And with the epidemic of divorce, it obviously led to the total destruction of the family unit, which is the base on which all human civilization rests. As a result, it also gave us 3 generations of single mothers, fatherless children, delinquent, teenage crime, teenage prostitution, teenage pregnancies. You're familiar with all of these, social diseases. And more importantly, more dangerously, this idea, this basic theory from the Frankfurt School became law in the US. It's also become law in India. I mean, all of you are familiar with the dreadful section 498A. So 498A is a variant of a law that was passed in the US, at least I think roughly 3 decades back, sometime in the 80s. So in the same period, what was happening in India? Let's have a brief look at that. So before independence, we had communists like M.N. Roy, all these PC Joshi, S.A. Dange, all these guys. They had borrowed directly from Lenin and Stalin and said that India will, we should have a violent revolution in India, and a communist state like Russia or China should be established in India. We are familiar with all that. In the same period, we also had something called an Adhikari thesis. Most of us don't know about this, but back then it was very, very influential. It was written, I think, in 1942 or 43. It was authored by a communist leader, an intellectual named Gangadhar Adhikari, which basically argued that India is not one country, either politically or cultural, but it was made up of several, I'm going to read that out. It was made up of several castes, subcastes, subsects, and if all of these subcastes and castes and religions chose to have a separate country, they should be given the permission to have a separate country. This thesis, you have to read it, and you know why it was written? It was written as a justification for which supported Jinnah's and Muslim League's demand for a separate country based on Islam for Pakistan. This is how they justified. So, I mean, the summary of Adhikari thesis is very simple. Basically, it says that, okay, if Muslims are demanding a separate nation for themselves called Pakistan, they should be given, because there is no concept called unity of India. That there's no, India is not a single country. So he also gives a list of different countries. He names Lingayat country. I'm going to read out just a few lists, few items. So we have a separate Lingayat country. Remember, not Karnataka, just Lingayat country, a Kanyakumari country, a Baloch country, a Sindh country, a Tamil country, Andhra country, Punjabi country, Bengali country, and the list. I mean, I suppose you get the idea of how, of the mindset that wrote this. And long story short, the communists are the original Breaking India forces. Much before the term became popular, it was laid down in black and white in a document published by the Communist Party of India in 1942 or 40. This is the origin of Breaking India forces. But to their great fortune, I'm going to fast forward this. To the great fortune, the communists got their most prized idiot in the form of Mr. Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, who unfortunately became our first prime minister. And which sane country on this earth even dedicates postage stamps to mass murderers who are basically communist leaders? They sided with the Muslim League, and they sided with the Razakars in committing genocides of poor innocent people. And we have an independent India which honors them with postage stamps. So, but next, the story of how the same communists systematically, took over all our institutions, chiefly the educational and intellectual and media establishment. This story is well known how they captured, so I won't go into detail in this one. So, beginning again roughly from the establishment, getting the Jawaharlal Nehru University, establishing that was one of the biggest victories for the communists in independent India. So after that, over the next 30-35 years, it occupied all key positions and institutions, whatever, social sciences institutions, humanities, and the rest, and infiltrated all avenues of public discourse. But more importantly, it patronized, it trained, and it created 2 generations of Breaking India academics, students. And how did they do it? They did it by, generous patronage, by giving money, fellowships, scholarships to prestigious universities, both in India and abroad. Chiefly, yes, we come back to the same thing, the amount of damage that Chicago and Columbia universities have done, especially to the unity and integrity of India, its social structures, its traditions, and especially to the ancient Sanatana civilization, is incalculable. So there's a reason all these guys, Wendy Doniger, she is from Chicago University, and by the mid-1970s, the first stream of such ideologically brainwashed feminists and cultural Marxists began gaining prominence in Indian public discourse. And I'm not including, their apologists for Islamic jihad and Christian missionary conversions, which whitewash everything that they have done, all the horrible crimes that they have committed in history. I'm actually excluding that from this talk. That itself is a separate story which we can look at in future. But it was a sustained work of these cultural Marxists, all these feminists and their fellow travelers, that has led us to what we are witnessing all around us. And if you have a section 498A here, you have a parallel like we just discussed earlier. You have a parallel law both in the US and say in the UK as well, which which disproportionately favors women to not only to claim victimhood, but to actively destroy men. So a lot of studies, I'm sure this audience is largely familiar with it. And this is the kind of semi-detailed background to and the context for what I will discuss next, which is the levels at which these, which is the levels at which this toxic ideology operates. Let me give a few data points here. The primary level of this ideology, of the Frankfurt School ideology, is also its goal of capturing absolute and unchallenged political power. And the subsidiary levels are all meant to spread this ideology. These subsidiary levels are as follows. One, education at all levels, starting from the KG all the way up to postdoctoral level. Second, the so-called intelligentsia, like our column writers and opinion makers and opinion shapers. The media, obviously editors and journalists. The bureaucracy, those who actually sit in key positions in, say, decision-making levels, and who actually implement the ideology using the machinery of the state. And the last one is the judiciary, and those who are large sections of the judiciary, especially in the US and even in India as well, they are committed leftists. So because unfortunately, one of the ways in which this can be understood, the function of the judiciary can be understood, is that over the years, it has no longer become a body to deliver what is known as justice, but it has become a body that merely interprets the law. There's a significant difference between these two. So if you're a committed leftist judge, then your judgments literally, and if you sit in the Supreme Court, there's literally no limit to how you can interpret the law. But anyway, so let's examine how all these operate in a fairly detailed fashion, and which is the last bastion after the judiciary. So we have seen how education was taken over, how the leftists have infiltrated the intelligentsia, the media, and the bureaucracy and judiciary. Which is the last bastion after the judiciary? Quickly, anyone? The last bastion of infiltration.
Some responses are coming in, social media.
Okay, I can't see them.
Yeah, actually coming across.
Okay. Religious institutions, administration services, that's the bureaucracy.
Students.
The last bastion.
IAS,
that's all covered under bureaucracy and education.
Okay.
So the last bastion is the military. Imagine what will happen if the military is infiltrated by active communists or believing leftists. Imagine an India where, in which that happens. And so, yeah, I mean, that's a food for thought, if you will. So to understand the detailed implications of this, we now get to what is known as the fourth generation warfare. So in India, the communists faced their greatest defeat owing to two major events. The first was the fall of the Soviet Union. It had been their mothership. It had been their only fatherland from where they got, both funding. Weapons used to be smuggled from USSR into India, primarily to West Bengal, and distributed all over to Kerala and other Tripura, other places. So their mothership, the fatherland, fell apart. That was the first big defeat for them. And the second big defeat, which which is unique only to India, was the rise of the great Hindu revival movement, or the great resurgence of Hinduism in the 1990s in the form of Ram Janmabhoomi movement. So no other country had this kind of solid opposition to the communists. So this is the reason they recognize Hinduism as their greatest and the most insurmountable opposition to all their schemes and plots. But for this, the communists would have succeeded in a big way in the 90s itself. So obviously, this kind of resurgence on the part of the Hindu society, it shattered all their hopes of having a great violent communist revolution in India. And long story short, they could no longer, it became so bad for them that with the fall of the Babri Masjid, they and the USSR, they could no longer call themselves as comrade. I mean, all these guys, a lot of top media editors, I can't name them, but I know for a fact that a lot of these top media editors, when they were talking in their privately, they would address each other as comrade, which is a hardcore communist term. So they could no longer, use these words in public. They couldn't say comrade. They couldn't call themselves progressives. They couldn't call themselves Marxists. They couldn't call themselves communists. So they kind of, did a strategic retreat, and they tried to slowly recoup their strength to see how they could, strategize their battle for the future. So, and one way in which they changed the track was very simple. Again, language in communism holds a very, very fundamental part, which is why they keep coming up, coining all kinds of new phrases, which we'll quickly see. So after the destruction of their ideology and all the support they had in the 90s and up to 2004, the leftists, the communists generally kind of lay low, and they became busy in building strategic networks, not just in India, but internationally as well. And they, studied and tried to understand and exploit the vulnerabilities of this resurgent Hindu movement. So you identify a set of vulnerabilities in any movement that is on the ascendant, and figure out how to either infiltrate it and bring it down by chopping it from inside. So in 2004, much to their surprise, they hit a jackpot. The communists got, all of you know this, they got 60 Lok Sabha seats, which is the highest ever, beyond their wildest imagination. They got this kind of number. So what did they do? They did very cleverly, very deviously, they decided to extend outside support and not join the government in UPA 1. So what happened, a series of events occurred between 2004 and roughly 2014. We'll go through that, but first I'll read out a quote from the current NSA, Mr. Ajit Doval. He says, the area under Naxal influence had nearly doubled, extending to 203 districts in 14 states across India, and the cadre, which was less than 7,000, has now swelled to about 13,500. So left extremists today have much more sophisticated weapons, and they were able to pay monthly salaries just like any corporation. They were able to pay monthly salaries to their cadre. What else happened during this period? It is also not a mere coincidence that the last Hindu kingdom of the world, Nepal, became communist in the same period. And who was the main ideologue who had waged a guerrilla war against the Hindu kingdom of Nepal? He is a former graduate from JNU. His name is Baburam Bhattarai. Then all hardcore communist laws were passed. The deadly Right to Education Act, then the Food Security Bill, and even they tried to, table that, the Communal Violence Bill, which basically holds Hindus for being guilty for being Hindus. So, I mean, we all know the kind of outrage it was kind of, put into the dustbin. But make no mistake that if they ever get anywhere near political power, they will make it into a law. The Communist Violence Bill will become law if they are let anywhere near power. So, and with the exit of the communists in 2008 over the nuclear deal, and when UPA 2 came back to power in 2009, something worse had happened. These guys had now, exited, withdrawn their former political support to the Congress party. But what they had done is that they had put their top ideologues right into the topmost, into the corridors of political power, right in Delhi. It was Sonia Gandhi's NAC. What is NAC? National Advisory Council. It was a body of, populated by the heads of top Naxalite NGOs, all kinds of Maoist groups. Aruna Roy, who's that guy, that fellow, Harsh Mander, all these guys, all top Maoists and Naxals. They had they were not answerable to anyone. They were not answerable to the PM himself, Mr. Manmohan Singh. So this is the case of what is known as, the fence eating the field. So they began slowly gnawing away at the vitals of Indian civilization and the Indian state and nation, waging war, dismantling it from within. So I've described all this in detail in my 3 or 4 part series on Dharma Dispatch. So I'm going to skip it for now. But for those who are interested, you can read the second part of Vinod Mehta, Outlook editor Vinod Mehta. He describes in quite some detail about all these guys coming, Aruna Roy, Arvind Kejriwal, all these Arundhati Roy, all these folks would regularly visit his office in Delhi, Outlook office in Delhi, and discuss, the ways of furthering their movement. I think the name of Vinod Mehta's book is Editor Unplugged or something. I mean, the details are really scary, but he writes them, he describes all these people as some kind of heroes. But anyway, long story short, jungle Naxalism, Maoist terrorism within the forest, it had systematically but surely moved into our cities, and it was directly controlling the levers of the topmost levers of power in the central government. And an official proof of this was tabled in the parliament in 2013. It was a report of the Ministry of Home Affairs. I'm going to read out just one line from it. The frontal organizations of the CPI Maoist party, operating under the garb of human rights NGOs, have kept the Maoist movement alive and are more dangerous than armed cadres. These mass organizations are generally headed by ideologues who include academicians and activists fully committed to the party line. Such organizations ostensibly pursue human rights related issues and are also adept at using the legal processes of the Indian state to undermine and weaken enforcement action by our security forces. They also malign the state institutions through propaganda and disinformation to further the cause of their revolution. The state governments are required to initiate legal action against the Maoist front organizations in towns and cities. However, initiating legal proceedings against them has often resulted in negative publicity for the enforcement agencies due to the effective propaganda machinery of the CPI. Sounds familiar? So all these guys who were arrested, Sudha, Bharadwaj, Varavara Rao, all those guys who were arrested a couple of years back, what was the backlash? It didn't even take 2 hours for the Wire to put out, a huge news, whatever, op-ed piece or essay condemning, this is another Hindutva fascism by Hindutva government. So they have completely penetrated all areas of not just public discourse, but institutions as well. And I mean, they get advanced information that one of their ideologues is going to be arrested on such and such a day. This cannot happen without having their moles at the highest levels in the government, even in this government. So it is this well-oiled apparatus that instigate violence at a time and place of their choosing, almost at will. It unleashes all kinds of propaganda, the Kathua rape, for example. How many of us remember that now? And okay, Gauri Lankesh, how many people here, apart from those who are hailing from Karnataka, how many people had heard of her before she got killed? Quickly. Any answers? No, no, no. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So the point is, how did, and now her name is almost imprinted in all our minds. This is called having a hold on not just public discourse, but on the public social psyche at that level. Then the other important weapon in the fourth generation warfare, and this is very important, is something called the surrender of Naxal terrorists. You must be aware that, you know, a surrendered Naxal terrorist is far more dangerous than the guy who is inside the jungle, for a simple reason. What happens after their surrender? They are given relatively light sentences, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. It will just pass like that. And then they are also treated almost with kid gloves in the jail. And once they come out, they are merged into the mainstream society and they are rehabilitated. They become lecturers, they become school teachers, they become whatever, sub-editors, editors, journalists, whatever, some provision is made for them. But what do? They set up think tanks, but what do? The same thing that they were doing with guns in the jungle, of spreading toxic communist propaganda in the society, poisoning the minds of entire generations. But at a deeper and, you know, both at a national and global level, this whole phenomenon, ideological penetration, has unfolded as a result of the UPAs and especially the Congress party's patronage to all these far left activists and you know, intellectuals, is that today the Congress party is the political face of far left. I don't want to use the level terrorist, but you know, it's very tempting. But it is the Congress party is the political face of breaking India forces today. I mean, this person, just before 2019 elections, Mr. Rahul Gandhi had met Gadar. He was one of the, there was a guy responsible for, Gadar is from Andhra, one of the, recognized as one of the deadly terrorists, Maoist terrorists for a long time, the Congress itself. YSR, Indira Gandhi, all these people had, you know, kind of suppressed people like Gadar. Now today, Indira Gandhi's grandson, he is hugging Gadar, seeking his support. What bigger proof than you know, what bigger proof do we need than this kind of thing that's happening? So ultimately, what really matters is not, you know, all these optics in the public. What matters is to study who and what are the forces actually controlling the Congress party today, and what are the forces actually controlling the forces that are controlling the Congress party. So in hindsight, you know, we can look at a few data points here on how this whole thing is panned out, especially after 2014. You take any incident, any uprising, you know, they are not insignificant actually, and they should not be ignored simply because, you know, BJP has political power or whatever it is. They are operating at unimaginable levels, as I said. So all these serial PILs, look, for example, the Sabrimala thing, the judgment, it didn't happen overnight. It had at least 2 decades of planning. Remember that the first outrage against Sabrimala happened when Jayamala, the film actress, Kannada film actress, Jayamala, she entered Ayyappa temple there. Remember that? When did this happen? This happened in 2006. Who was in power in 2006 in both Kerala and in the center? Congress and Communists, rather, that coalition. So, and then all this Dahi Handi, Jallikattu, what is happening is This is a classic battle strategy of what is known as encirclement. Like, you know, you are encircled at all levels and they keep chipping away, nibbling away tiny bites. So that, you know, you get, you know, someone, just like how these small rodents attack. So they can't kill you fully. So what they do is, one guy jumps in and tears away little flesh from your hand. So, and you can't chase a rodent or a rat or whatever. So what you do, you put a bandage. 5 minutes later, somebody else comes and, bleeding by 1,000 cuts. This is Sushil MS. So yeah, this is what has been happening to all facets of Hindu civilization. And this is being done, I mean, the foundations, like I said, were laid way back a century ago. So, you know, fake news today, all this Shekhar Gupta and Wire, all these other guys openly are saying that we will disseminate fake news. Now, fake news itself is a contradiction in terms. If it is fake, it is not news. So they're saying we will use, there are no rules. It is all out war. And this is a way we are fighting it. Do whatever you want. So it has come to this level of brazenness, and now, of course, they have their big daddy, Mr. George Soros, who's also declared, who's also come out pretty much in the open. But at the most fundamental level, at the psychological and social level, which is most important in our context today, is that fourth generation warfare is the politicization of the personal and the personalization of the political. I'm going to repeat that. One important and dangerous facet of fourth generation warfare is the politicization of the personal and the personalization of the political, and which has whatever academic, intellectual backing and the rest of it. And this politicization of the personal occurs primarily at 4 levels. 1, at the individual level. 2nd, at the family level. 3rd, at the level of the society. And 4th, at the level of the nation. So at the individual level, it panders to personal pathologies. Like, let's say, for example, my father hit me today. I mean, some teenage guy is there, his father hits him today, which is impossible in today's context. And, or let's say that a husband yells at his wife because there was too much of salt in sambar or something. So what would be any sane or normal person's response to this? You would either, you know, give it back, you know, verbal argument or something, or you just shrug it off. And if you have a sense of humor, you'll laugh at it, and, you know, you buy, you know, make up to your wife by, you know, buying her some flowers or diamond or whatever. So this is a normal response as we have come to know it all these years of human civilization. But what does the left do? The left precisely pinpoints such issues and it politicizes them. For example, let's look at these 2 examples. It gives an ideological diagnosis of this. So let's look at the first example. This teenager's fathers hit him, physically hit him, because the father was a man and he is the head of the family. Therefore, he is known as a patriarch of the family. Therefore, evil male patriarchy is the foundation of the family, and therefore all men, all fathers must be victimized in somehow, not victimized, must be made to pay for being head of the family. This is their ideological diagnosis and the solution. Second instance, let's say, you know, when the husband yells at the wife, again, the same thing. He is a man. Therefore, he is not civilized. He is a patriarch for the same reason. And therefore, the son and the wife together and the father together constitute what is known as a family unit, and it has to be, and it is fundamentally regressive because the guy is sitting at the top and it has to be destroyed. So therefore, no family. This is the way even, you know, everyday life occurrences are given an ideological twist and then politicized, and then lobbies are created, and then laws are made in the parliament. This is the full implication of how this thing works. And actually, the Bible for this kind of diagnosis of breaking up the family is again another book written by a intellectual academic of a Frankfurt school. The title of the book is known as The Authoritarian Personality. It was published in 1950, that is 70 years ago, by Theodor Adorno. I think you might remember his name now. So, for the first time in human history, the Western white male, in this context, it was a Western white male, was branded as mentally ill because he wanted to have a family. And what happens when this theory of patriarchy is transported into India? So, how does it happen? How does it, translate itself in the Indian context? We get something called the upper class Hindu male, also creatively known, but he is not just any upper class Hindu male. There are variations. He is the upper class Brahmin patriarch. Remember Jack Dorsey, who came to, Twitter head who came to India last year? What was the slogan that he kind of propagated? Destroy Brahminical patriarchy, right? So these have, far-reaching roots like this, very, very long, old roots like this. And remember that it is only the upper-class Hindu male who gets this branding, nobody else. You will not hear the same thing about, upper-class Christian male or an upper-class Muslim male. You will never hear this in public discourse. So what is the solution for, punishing or kind of making sure that this upper class Hindu male, dominating Hindu male behaves himself? Pass a law. So they're policing your behavior, they're destroying your family. So, but then all these are just outward manifestations of a far deeper phenomenon which works under the surface, and with such diagnosis and such laws. What actually has happened is that you have politicized the normal human being, normal male human being, and even females as well, and social interaction, so that you create a society where individuals inherently distrust one another. You simply cannot have a casual, cordial, pleasant conversations with a stranger in a bus or a train anymore. You create a society of psychotics, and this is done by design. So when this happens, what is left that binds, one person to another, stranger to a stranger, or even today, even one family member to another? What is that binding thread that binds two people with each other or a society? You have destroyed. There are no shared values anymore. There are no principles that keep a society, civilization together. There are no traditions worth upholding. What is left? Nothing. A vacuum. And who will fill the vacuum? The same communists, by establishing a great communist paradise. And the other thing that these ideologues have done is that they have mastered it. It's actually a great tool that they have, tactic and art form that they have mastered, is that inventing new terms constantly, with every decade, the left has been constantly inventing new terms. How many people have you here have read George Orwell's 1984? Quick. Okay, Shubham has read. Okay. So one of the important things in both 1984 and Orwell's Animal Farm is emphasis on tampering with, on using language to create what is known as social revolution. Is that double speak, media speak, double think, all these things. Is that you use a word which is very innocuous word, but which means its exact opposite, and sometimes it can mean two things at the same time. Like water can mean both solid and liquid. The liquid water can mean both solid and liquid. This kind of thing, and they've mastered this, and that's why they can keep coming up. They keep coming up with new terms. For example, this is a reason in the beginning I, raise that question, how many of you have heard these bizarre terminology? They don't mean anything, all these terminologies. What is body positive? What is, fat shaming? What is slut shaming? What is all this food fascism, dress fascism? What is all this? What do you mean triggered? What do you mean safe spaces? Right? So, and the other big word that all of us, including me, have mostly used subconsciously, civil society. Had any one of you here heard of the term civil society even 15 years back? We are in 2020. 15 years means 2005. When did civil society, the term civil society, gain widespread usage in public discourse? Precisely around the time of Anna Hazare's movement. Go and check out all the various news articles and papers that were written back in those days. All of them are available on the internet. The word civil society basically means a bunch of extremely well-networked and ideologically committed intellectuals, media editors, and some politicians as well. This is what civil society. Who is part of civil society? All these lobbies who kept on yelling on NDTV and CNN, IBN in those days. Who were they? The same guys, Aruna Roy, Harsh Mandar, all these guys, regularly featured. Rest of us are not part of society, or what is it? Either we are not part of society or we are not civil. So this is the other thing that they have mastered. And one of the latest thing that they've invented is something called the feminist letters. It is not a letter in the sense that you're writing a letter. It is a font. It is a typeface. So it is a special keyboard, and I'll read out, just a small excerpt, 2 lines from how it is defined. The feminist letters is a typeface which was created to amplify calls for gender equality. For example, the letter C is for campus assault. The letter R stands for religious rights. The letter X stands for X chromosomes. The letter K stands for keep your hands off. This is happening in the real world, which is more bizarre than the wildest fantasy any one of you can think of. This is insanity, but it's dangerous insanity. And next, I think we can consider some of the implications that this has for the Indian nation and the Hindu civilization. Now, think what was formerly known as communism has infected our country and our society, and it is hurting our Sanatana civilization in its current avatar as 4th generation war. Some people also call it urban nationalism. But this has it no longer remains merely in the realm of ideology. It no longer is confined to books and academic papers and theses, but it has morphed into thousands of concurrent battles that are being waged by our own people against our own country and culture and society. So here's a random question. You approach one of these star kids, people like, who's that lady? Gurmeher Kaur, and that horrible woman, Swara Bhaskar, Hardik Patel, that Kanya Kumar, all this, and their entire gang. Go and ask them if, at least not Kanya Kumar, but these people, if Gurmeher Kaur, for example, ask her if she is a communist. She will say no. This is the level of, percolation at in their psyche that this ideology has done over nearly a century. And try and convince them that what you're all spouting is utter nonsense, that it is not rooted in reality, it is a toxic ideology. Try convincing them. They will look at you like you're crazy. Mission accomplished. And it's simply impossible to get them to listen to reason or even politeness or facts or logic. And what is the average age bracket of all these folks? And what does that tell you about the future of India? So one major ingredient and in the success of this psychological warfare, this is psychological warfare. So one major ingredient of this success is the destruction of even the notion of sanctity among the youth. You know, old shlokas that we all grew up, Guru Brahma, Matru Devo Bhava, all these things, Acharya Devo Bhava, these things sound like galis to their ears. It sounds like obscenities to their ears. And so now we have moved into a world where it's a badge of honor for these youths to abuse the prime minister's mother and sister, you know, with all kinds of unmentionable obscenities, which are given publicity by who? By people old enough to be their fathers and grandfathers. What is the average age of all these top editors, you know, Shekhar Gupta and Rajdeep Sardesai? What is the average age? They're in the 50s, mid 50s at least. Why should they give, you know, celebrate them, all these lumpen youth actually? Why should they celebrate their galis as if it's a badge of honor? What does that tell you? So let's look at the other important facet, and I hope I won't scare you with this. Fourth generation, perhaps the most lethal phase of fourth generation warfare is the manner in which it has invaded our drawing rooms and right on our palms, and more importantly, the palms of our kids. That is their mobile phones and their laptops and iPads and whatever. What this means is very simple. It is simply impossible for parents to even know what their children are reading and watching and who they're listening to and how they're being influenced at a very, very, very subtle level. Why is that? For example, why is that we no longer bat an eyelid at an urban coffee shop, for example, or a pub or whatever? Casually, this lady, and this, I'm an eyewitness to this one. I was sitting in some coffee shop long back, and I overheard a teenaged girl, a very young girl, maybe 16, 17, with a group of friends, and she was loudly, you know, talking about her, you know, mom, using words, you know, my mom is a bloody slut and whore and all that kind of thing. Nobody in the entire, at you know, earshot distance, anybody sitting, you know, 3-4 tables around her could listen to what she was saying. Nobody batted an eyelid. Nobody even looked up. So the question is, how and why did this happen? In fact, I mean, we should really applaud the kind of evil foresight that the Frankfurt School especially, and the communists generally speaking, when they completely took over education from KG to PG. So if we all think that, you know, by merely changing or rewriting history and other textbooks, things will change for the better, I think we need to seriously introspect and perhaps have a serious rethink about these fundamental issues. Because the left liberal establishment has totally destroyed what is known as humanities. And what they are now doing is that they're sitting back, relaxing, and enjoying the benefits of this destruction. Let's put this in a different way. And I think we're coming to a close of this thing. I'll conclude by asking a few pointed questions. Here are a few questions, and these are all derived from publicly available documents, which anybody can verify. Question number 1, why are our schools, you know, at the primary level, at least, why are our schools teaching sex education to pre-adolescent children? Question 2, why are our teenagers being taught such things as female orgasms and Bulgarian lesbianism? I'm not kidding. This is happening in India, in Indian schools. How do our college kids instinctively know that, you know, they must support nonsensical agitations like LGBT and all this CAA protests and whatever? Anything that has any so-called agitation or movement that remotely has a sexual connotation, you will see a majority of population are college students, at least 10th standard and above. Why do this people belonging to this age group instinctively know that they must support such agitations. Question number 4. So what exactly are phony academic subjects like women's studies, gender studies, alternate sexual studies, and all assorted nonsense, all pseudo disciplines? What are these disciplines contributing in any meaningful way to India's national GDP, or expanding the intellectual and mental horizons of our children, or even adults? Question number 5. That's the final question. Why is there such an explosive emphasis on sexualizing everything on a scale and extent which is unprecedented at any time in all of human history? I'll leave you again with another tidbit from history to understand, where this comes from, where all this overtly sexualized and all kinds of nonsense subjects were originally derived from. We look at that old villain again, Mr. George Lukács. He became the deputy commissar or commissioner for culture in the communist government in Hungary. It was a very short-lived government. In 1919, remember the year, 1919, there was a short-lived communist government in Hungary, and this guy was a minister for culture, George Lukács. One of the first things that he did was to introduce sex education into Hungary's public schools, and he declares the reason why he introduced sex education for kids as young as 4 years old, as young as 4. He gives the reason. He says that if we could destroy the traditional sexual morals, we would have taken a massive step towards destroying traditional culture itself. And finally, I will quote William Lind to give some idea about what fourth generation, some important features and themes of fourth generation war, and you can verify with real life data points what's happening all around us. The goal of fourth generation warfare is to collapse the enemy internally rather than physically destroying him. So correct identification of the strategic centers of gravity of the enemy is highly important. Fourth generation warfare will be widely dispersed and largely undefined. The distinction between war and peace will be blurred to the vanishing point. I repeat that. The distinction between war and peace will be blurred to the vanishing point. Actions will occur concurrently throughout the society as a cultural and not just a physical entity. The growth of robotics and artificial intelligence may offer a potential for radically altered tactics. If we treat, what do you call? Okay, for want of a better word, if we treat these left liberals under the purview of our laws, traditional laws, they gain many protections. If we simply shoot them down or punish them legally, the television news can easily make them appear to be the victims. In this way, they can effectively wage their form of warfare while being protected by the very society they are attacking. So in light of what we have discussed so far, you will agree that the situation described by William Lind is already ongoing in Bharatavarsha in the form what is known as fourth generation warfare. Now think of the alternate scenario. Think of what would have happened if the UPA had recaptured political power in 2014. Think of a fate of Mr. Narendra Modi, who had lost the elections in 2014. Think of these two aspects for a brief moment. And in fact, I urge you all to think of these two aspects every single time before critically consuming the multi-pronged, multifaceted, multi-directional propaganda that reaches all of us as news and opinion and public discourse. Think about something very, very fundamental. If an out of power Congress and their communist, I don't make a distinction between Congress and communists, that line is gone, it has been erased. So if an out of power Congress and communists can unleash such frequent disruptions, this Jane Bakery thing, what is this in Chennai? So if it can unleash such frequent disruptions across the nation, a Congress in power can give us RT, it can give us communal violence bill, it can politicize, it is already politicized, but what it can do is that it can gobble up the last bastion of our nation's external and internal defense, the military war. So what we are, if we are not careful, what we are facing right now is the fourth generation war. And if we don't kind of find solid solutions to combat it, it can't be defeated so easily, because by its very nature, it is very amorphous and it is completely invisible. All these Farah Bhaskar, they don't even know that they're pawns, that they're being used in this fashion. So if we don't quickly and urgently come up with a cogent response as a civilization, this is not a political war by which can be fought and defeated by, political methods or by winning elections. This is especially for a Hindu civilizations like Sanatana Dharma. It is more vital because the manner in which the fourth generation war is being fought at all levels, on all scales, and in different directions, it becomes extremely it is one thing to identify the enemy itself, but the motives and the methods and targets of attack, directions of attack, it is completely blurred, it is invisible. So unless we kind of come up with a solid strategy, civilizational strategy, not merely a political or intellectual strategy, unless we come up with a solid, cogent, long-lasting civilizational strategy, I'm afraid there won't be a fifth generation war. So I guess that's all I had. And I must really applaud all your patience for listening to me. Thanks once again for Sarayu Trust. Thanks, Rahul. I'm open to any questions.
This is really scary. So, I mean, these guys want a universal basic income type of thing, and everybody sort of lying down in games and sex. And to what outcome are they working? I mean, what was the original communist ideology? What do they want to do with this power?
Okay, so absolutely, a great question. Actually, if you look at folks like George Soros, right? Some of these guys have grand delusions, grand fantasies of having, a uniform, a single world order, which is controlled only by a select few elites, and the rest of human beings become subhumans, as in they are not even humans. So it is power for power's own sake, power for its own sake. As simple as that. So there are different ways of doing it. Earlier, you would do it, through violent means, through instigating revolutions and capturing political power. But that is unsustainable in the long term. So how long did communist government last in Russia? Not even a century, not even 70 years, right? I mean, roughly 70 years. So that brute violence cannot work. So there are alternate ways to do it, is by altering your psyche itself from the level of children.
Yeah.
Right. So this is not very different from how children are trained. Taliban trains very young Muslims from the age of 3 or 4, and they grow up to become suicide bombers because they know nothing else.
Thank you, Rahul. Thank you, Sandeep ji, for a fantastic discussion or talk, as always. I have one question, but before that, I just want to make a quick 10-second point. The children that my school study in is considered India's best school. Mm-hmm. And the history teacher there tells them to hate Modi, just so you know. It also happens that Priyanka Gandhi's children also study in the same school. Maybe that's
Yeah.
a coincidence. All right. My question is, in the Western world,
Mm.
the commies seem to be negating, or their enemy seems to be the church, in terms of destroying the family unit, in terms of, you know, the gender fluidity and all the fancy words that you hear. Whereas in India, they seem to be sleeping with the church. So what's this contradiction or this strange phenomena?
No, it's not strange. It's very answer is in front of your eyes actually, because see, India is the only country where historically opposing enemies, sworn enemies, have come together and are sleeping on the same bed. That is Islam, Christianity, and communism. All three are facets of the same impulse of totalitarianism, or whatever you want to call it. Right? They all stem from the same impulse. So they realize that such a large country with such a massive population is still majority Hindu, and they see this as their biggest obstacle. No matter, you might, tell lies in textbooks and, do away with it. But at the level of the family, at the level of community, you still have your, yatras and your pushkars and, what is it called? Kumbh Melas, right? These are still thriving, and they are attended by people in numbers, not in thousands, but in crores, in lakhs. So how do you destroy this? So they have formed a very loose alliance, communists and all obviously opportunistic alliances. And the best manifestation of this is you can see in West Bengal. So in West Bengal, and you can use this as a formula freely wherever you want. Every time, the moment communism sleeps with Islam, with Islamism, whatever you want to call it, Islamism will end up eating communism. This is exactly what happened in Iran. So who were at the forefront of overthrowing, the Americanized regime in Iran? The communists contributed a lot. And who benefited from it? Khomeini. So if you are seeing an influx of all these illegal Bangladeshi immigrants, it was a practice started by the communists under Jyoti Basu. So you can no longer contain the Islamist violence in West Bengal. Why? Because of communism. It has literally given it away to them.
And so they don't learn this from history. How are they able to continue allowing Islamism? Because if they know that this is going to eat them.
Well, every leader who sits and who is intoxicated with power thinks that he knows the best, and I can keep the beast under control. But what he doesn't realize is that he also has an expiry date, right? He has to go. He'll die someday. But within that interim, it is this play of ego that makes you do all these things.
Sure. And Sandeep, you were quoting, from all these communist people quite often, and very violent ideologies. They actually put all this out in the open and get away with it. I mean,
sir, absolutely, sir. It's all there. That is one of their successes, actually. See, whatever they do, communists, what you cannot accuse communists of is that they are unambiguous about their goals. If they say, in a public platform, if they say that, hum Bharat ke tukde karenge, they mean it. And you have to take them seriously. If they write that we want to give sex education to a 3-year-old daughter, they mean it. And they will not stop till it is achieved in some other form. The point is, because when they start out, their numbers are so few that the society is generally, the normal society will look at them as fringe, who are mad people, and it's best that you stay away from them. Whereas they're dead serious about their goals and the methods which they wish to adopt to realize that goal.
Namaste, Sandeep ji. Thank you very much for an excellent talk. In your Pragnya Bharati talk about Dharmika Kshatriyas and how to counter these people, I saw a lot of similarity with some of the points you raised there and here. As common citizenry, apart from challenging them at our workplace and if wherever we meet them, like outside educational institutions, like Shri Pandit mentioned, what are the group action we can take? Because the judiciary is compromised. So till the collegium system and other systems elsewhere in the world, because the judiciary is the only method of giving them justice unless and until you pick up machetes and swords like the Islamists do, which unfortunately Hindus are unwilling to. What other way do you advise that they are countered?
No, okay. A couple of important ways is that, strengthen what has always worked for us. There's a reason that if something has worked for 800 years or 2000 years or whatever, it has an intrinsic strength to it. In this case, it is a Hindu family, right? So strengthen that family unit, and most importantly, there are some low-hanging fruits that you can easily pick. Now, fundamentally, an ordinary communist is a bully, basically. A left liberal is a bully, which is why they will not indulge you in a reasonable debate. Take it from me. You cannot call them across the table and sit and talk. They won't do that. So it is basically spit and run. So you also call them mad. I think I've mentioned given some detailed steps, so I don't want to repeat some Dharma dispatch. So call out their bullying, number one. And number two, make sure you don't have anything to lose, that they can't damage you either financially or professionally or whatever. So that is a very big strength. And three, they create very nice little traps for you using language. So preempt those traps and, kind of skirt them or avoid them. And at the level of society, make sure that they are treated with contempt. These are the short-term measures, but long-term measures, Hindu society as a whole should sit and really, really think.
Nice talk by you. The one question is I have raised what is the main agenda for them? The communalism is spreading, and what will they achieve? If we start the sex culture in the early age, is a totally wrong aspect on the our Sanatan Dharma. So we can defend them by the rising our Sanatan Dharma Sanskruti, and we can defend them. In the very few friends I have talked with them, and we in the face-to-face debate, I give the quotation of the Sex and Culture, J.D. Ewing books. In that they mentioned the sex.
Your question, please. Your question.
My question is, if we rise the Sanatan Dharma education from the childhood, we can defeat them easily?
I don't know, yaar. I mean, it's dicey, but I keep repeating of late, this thing the suggestions to most parents especially is that stop sending your children to school. Because once they step out, and I mean, first of all, the entire syllabus and textbooks are completely rigged. And the teachers, most of them especially, where English is a medium of instruction, they are innately anti-Hindu. Not just that, they'll poison your kids. You forget sex and all the other things. They will poison your kid against you. Now look at all these, teenagers coming out in these LGBT nonsense. And you see all this on social media as well and elsewhere, blogs and all that. These children abuse their own parents in vulgar language. Where are they learning this from? They're learning this primarily in the school, right? And their peer group or whatever, right? So don't send your kids to school, basically. Inculcate some strong physical habits in them. The lesser you expose them to technology, the better they'll grow up as well-rounded individuals who can think for themselves, who are rooted in their culture.
Sandeep, as you mentioned, the future technologies would be a carrier of spreading communism. So what are the roles of businesses today to keep those communisms or communist thoughts at bay, and what are small companies like I myself can take in consent that we continuously work towards that?
Well, I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer this question because most of the major tech companies at the top level, they are completely penetrated by these guys, by the left liberal lobby. So look, in our tradition, there are two things, yes, dharma, artha, and kama and moksha, right? So on the left-hand side of artha is dharma. So you're not supposed to earn money uh, in a fashion that goes against dharmic concepts, which means we placed a great deal of emphasis on the means of earning money rather than earning money itself. So now what has happened is that you are looking all these great business success stories, right? You don't know exactly what they have done to get there. So unless you have divorced dharma from artha, makes sense, right? So this can be done at the level of the individual businessman itself, and there's no blanket kind of a solution for this. But then one way that that could be suggested, and this kept happening recurrently, is that business will understand only the language of money, and the moment the revenues start falling, they will slowly turn around and stop from indulging in activities that creates outrage in society. So this is exactly the case of all these that Zomato guys, who said that food has no religion, and they began to quote from Quran or something, right? Some nonsense. These things keep happening simply because the society at large does not penalize them. The moment they're penalized financially, they will feel the pinch, and then automatically, even if they don't want to, they will follow in the dharmic path or the righteous path or whatever. This is a simple answer. I'm not sure if it made sense, but like I said, I'm the least qualified to talk on this subject.
Sandeep, I have a point to make over here, and I keep repeating very often, including in the earlier talk. We Hindus, unlike the Muslims and Christians, maybe we give part of our wealth to temples, which anyways are under government control. We really need to identify organizations, and there are hundreds of them, hundreds. We need to identify and part away, define a percentage, 5%, 7%, 10%, 3%, whatever, and say every month I'm going to donate to these 2-3 organizations. And that's it. I'm not going to ask questions of how my money is being used and all of this nonsense. We ask 100,000 questions, which is ridiculous. Before donating. This has
I fully
to
agree, Rahul. I fully agree, Rahul. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. There are no two ways about it, because see, like they say, put your money where your mouth is and all that, all those nice things. But with specific regard to Hindu religious institutions, they played a bigger role historically in keeping the community and dharma together. So they played a major role in society. They had a direct impact and influence on society. Unfortunately, that is almost nearly totally broken. Nearly broken. 90% is broken.
Yeah.
So how do we regard a typical archaka of a temple as? We regard him almost with contempt, and I'm not sorry for saying this. Most of us regard them, almost with contempt, almost like a bhikari or something. Aha, yellow, whatever. So this is the attitude we have. But they were regarded as, in the past, till recent times, at least even 50, 60 years back, they were regarded as spiritual gurus who would give solace to a troubled mind. All these, today, Hindus don't mind paying, 1 lakh to a psychiatrist. That role was fulfilled in a much better way by a local temple pujari. We have reduced him to not less than a beggar, and they are made the butt of jokes. I mean, humor has its place, but at what cost?
Yeah.
Right. So that's what I said. Na? At all levels, the backbone of Hindu society has been chipped away, bit by bit. So that had worked and kept our civilization together. I see no reason why it cannot, give an effective solution going forward.
Had a talk by Padma Shri T. Hanuman Chaudhary recently. And just while going out, I'm going to put this up. He actually, for individuals, for sure, he had the same appeal that just like Zakat, we Hindus have to start giving. And also for corporates, he said that we have to fulfill our corporate spiritual responsibility. CSR, he says, is not social, it's spiritual responsibility.
Yes, true. It was already there, Rahul. These things were already part and parcel of our living.
Yeah.
We have kind of isolated ourselves. So it's a long drawn struggle.
Hello, sir. Namaste. Sir, actually, I wanted to ask that as you mentioned previously that the last domain for leftists to infiltrate is the military. Can you elaborate as to how this might be possible in the future?
Damn simple. Yeah, you get committed leftist ideologues into. Actually, it has already happened. For example, that guy, Mr. Ramdas, right? He's a former Navy guy, right? When the military gets ideologically inclined, if tomorrow, for example, China invades us, for example, what are the chances that he will fight on the side of India or he'll fight on the side of communism represented by China?
This was a very nice talk. I want to ask, will banning communism in Hindustan help in any way? Like banning books, the ideology and everything?
Banning communism, well, actually, it might come as a surprise, but the Communist Party of India did not have formal recognition until 1950 or 51. So it could not contest elections. So I think that is a step in a good direction. I highly recommend it. But again, political power, but we should live in the real world, because now it is not confined only in the realm of politics. They have caught hold of 2 generations of our children. We have to prevent that from happening to the future generations. We are fighting, like I said, at the level of the psyche, at the level of the intellect and language, for example. So banning won't help much. Re-education is, I think, suggested method.
Namaste, sir. Thanks for such an insightful lecture. Sir, you talked at length about Indian communists and their sinister agenda. But to me, the premise is still confusing because their ideological ringmasters are sitting somewhere else. And what I mean by confusing premise is that there are different streams of communism as well. Like we have pro-Hegelian communist lobby led by intellectuals like Professor Slavoj Žižek, whose school of followers have very different taste. And then we have this conservative Marxist lobby led by intellectuals like Noam Chomsky, who is too hard on facts. And then we have this politically correct cultural Marxist stream, which didn't even hesitate to forge alliance with Islamic fanatics. So do you think we need to appreciate those differences in communist ideology in terms of Indian situation as well? Or we should attack each and every single idea coming out of communist forums? And there is one follow-up question also on this point, that what alternative model of governance do you have as a suggestion that can be married?
I'll answer the first question first.
Okay.
So now ask them just one question about whether about Hinduism, where their sympathies lie and how they regard India. Is it still a third world country? Is Hinduism something like only about the caste system and whatever multiple gods, idol worship? Ask them just one question and get their answer. Then you will know exactly where to put. So in general, it is like this. The root is the same. what you're describing about Noam Chomsky and the rest of these guys, I make no distinction. And I suggest you also don't make any such distinction. Because these are all, it is like the leaf and you're making a distinction between, a banyan tree and its leaf and its trunk and its branches and its roots. It's the same thing. The verbiage is different. They might, see, they will have differences in some finer points of whatever specific issues related to human beings. Okay? So, but overall, they conform to the idea of communism. As simple as that.
Sir, and there is a follow-up question also, that what alternative model of governance do you have as a suggestion that can be meritorious enough to take head-on with this communist model of governance? Because Marxist thesis on governance are pretty sophisticated. Take, for example, if today I ask a poor, underprivileged Indian to choose between state-sponsored medical services and privately owned medical services, then certainly he will go with the first option. So indeed, you are correct that there is plenty of garbage propagated in the name of communist ideology, but the subtle thesis of Marxist ideology has by far no match in terms of merit. Or I'll put it in this way, that their competitive worth can't be denied completely, I think. What do you think?
I mean, look, these are all, what model of governance that I have to offer is, it lies in the realm of what you call a different discussion. But you're right in the sense that, what communists do basically is that they speak, this is something they've picked up from Christian missionaries, is that they speak the language of compassion. Right? So when you speak the language of compassion, what the listener, the message the listener takes is what you see is what you get. Because as a communist ideologue, I might be talking language of compassion, but what am I thinking? I'm ultimately thinking of oppressing all of you, a single totalitarianism. But will I say that? No. I will mask it in the language of kindness, in the language of alleviating your poverty, because it is feel good. It feels very good. On the other hand, if I ask you to work hard, okay, and share your wealth with whoever it is, right? Pay your taxes, whatever. So it will not find too many takers. It is as old as that and as simple as that. So, like I said, most of the solutions for this lies at the level of education, for which the first and last line of defense is family. You stick, you hammer in traditional values, right? So deep from childhood within the confines of your own home, then you will look, your government, your political system will only be as strong or as weak as your society or your civilization. Next.
Good evening, Sandeep ji. Thank you so much for a very interesting talk. It's actually the first time a lot of aspects of what is happening around in India is being revealed to me. I just couldn't understand why suddenly out of the blue there was Tukre gang and so on. My specific question to you has to do with, when you mentioned the last bastion of the state, which they can infiltrate and could, there's a military. From what I understand, before they enter the services, defense services, they undergo rigorous, interviews and thematic perception tests and things like that. So at that time, there's a lot of weeding out of people who do not fit into the defense services setup. I'm talking about the officers. I was just wondering at what stage, once they enter the services, they go through, there's so many courses and so on. At what stage could they be brainwashed? Are there any red flags that you can identify so that it can be communicated?
At multiple stages, like I said, communists primarily operate at language which is a direct outcome of your thought and your psyche, right? So if military people or army officers, air force officers, defense officers, they are as human as you and I are, as the rest of the population is. So if what they see every day are columns by your usual suspects in the media, TY, Telegraph, all these guys, if that is the only diet they, reading diet they swallow, there is no guarantee that they won't be influenced by this. That is number one. And the level of influence and the level of what is called that, independent thinking widely varies, and it doesn't necessarily have to be uniform, even whether for an ordinary person or for an armed forces. But the difference is that the manner in which they become ideologically inclined to the level of betraying their own country for the sake of ideology. So it is not that communists haven't tried, what you call recruiting people from the armed forces. It has happened in the past, but as long as it remains at the level of what you call containable levels, that it is the entire army as an organization, if it is run on leftist ideological on those lines, it could be, something like, okay, let me put it in this fashion. Would you find an army officer in Stalin's Russia who did not toe the communist line? You won't find, right? So India would become something like that if this last bastion was breached. Does it answer your question?
Namaskar, Sandeep. Thanks a lot for wonderful talk. I just have one little question. Because the kind of grooming that is being provided by the English medium schools, especially to the kids, as you rightly said, from the KG to PG, what is the way forward, concrete way forward that can be followed? Right? Like most of the kids are even ashamed of wearing the Sanatan Chinna on their body. And sometimes I even was their mothers being shy of these things.
Yeah, so they have made you ashamed of yourself, basically, and this is a continuation of what the British started. So there are two ways to do it. One thing is to be aggressive and give it back, saying that you are proud of this and this is your whatever culture and whatever stuff that is. There is a beautiful. I mean, I don't like the late J. Jayalalitha very much, but if there's something she had extraordinary guts. So there's a very widely popular interview with Karan Thapar, where he pointedly asks her about, donating elephants to temples and wearing her big bindi and all that. She gives it back almost like a slap. So teach your children to be like that. One way, no matter what their books say. First of all, don't send them to these English schools, number one. And as much as possible, raise them at home. And teach them this basic level of guts, saying that you have no right to say this. Simple.
Dhanyavada.
No, sir.
The only question I had was, what are the good resources so that you can counter these young teenagers when they talk about LGBT, individualism, and radical feminism, everything? What are some of the resources or some of the people that you can listen to, so that you? I mean, I just want to know, like the Hindu family, the traditional values, conservatism in India. What are the sources to understand this better so that you can argue better?
No, that's what I'm saying. One of the central points I made is that don't argue with them. They're not open to argument. Why do you spend that time more productively, sir? I've given a ready reckoner on Dharma Dispatch on how to deal with these guys. Treat them as subhuman. You must not indulge them. You must not treat them as human beings. You must treat them as mental patients, basically. Okay, you must recommend therapy for them. Look, these LGBT, these are all artificially constructed theories which have no basis either in biology or in reality. Right? Are you telling me that they want to entirely replace an entire human race from whatever 10,000, 15,000, 30,000 years since human civilization? Are you telling me that you can replace it by inventing a bunch of theories which have not been tried out in practice? How is that possible? A civilization society grows organically over a period of hundreds and thousands of years by informal negotiations. Why do you want to argue and rebut them? It doesn't work like that. They are in need of hospital treatment. And you must regard them as patients. Do not ever get into an argument or anything. Otherwise, your blood will only boil. Because for a simple reason, they have gone so far beyond the limit of logic that you will end up increasing your blood pressure. Please do not do that. Treat them like a doctor treats a patient.